doing this today announcement to unveil our budget recommendations for the 26-27 fiscal year. And it's always good to be in a situation where we're being able to do this from a position of fiscal strength. So if you look back when I became governor, there was about, I think, $1.3 billion in Florida's rainy day fund. Now with this budget, we've more than tripled the state's rainy day fund. In fact, we're maxing it out to where you're not even allowed under Florida's Constitution to put any more money in the rainy day fund. We also launched a couple years ago, in conjunction with some folks in the Florida legislature, a program to accelerate the repayment of Florida's outstanding state debt. You can have some of this stuff. We got guys that do a good job of this. They can buy the bonds on the open market, oftentimes at a discount, retire them. Then we save money on interest. And so if you take all of Florida's debt since statehood until now, just since I've been governor, we've retired more than half of it. We're going to keep the momentum going with this budget. But what you do is you save. We've saved hundreds of millions of dollars in interest costs that we now don't have to pay because we're doing that early. The reserves, when I became governor, I think were probably, $7 billion range. The budget that we're submitting today is about $17 billion in reserves. So some of that's general revenue. That does include the fiscal, the rainy day fund, includes trust fund surpluses, a whole 9 yards. But that's a really, really good sign. And we're in a situation where the budget line that we're doing, $117 billion, is basically what we've been doing the last few years. I don't think you're going to find another state that's doing more meaningful things on transportation, environment, all these things, but then basically doing it with a stable budget. We will not have had any real significant overall increases in the budget. You'd probably have to go back, 3 or 4 years now. This current year's budget that we're in spends less than the year before that, and that year spent less than the year before that. So we're basically right in line with that as we look forward to going. And I'm proud of that. I think Florida's really led the way with fiscal responsibility. I've had to veto some stuff, that the legislature's done with line items, and you got to do what you got to do, right? I mean, it is what it is. I want to keep the budget in certain areas. But that being said, it's like I've vetoed more than any governor, but at the same time, by and large, the budgets have been good. There's some things here or there that we may disagree on, but by and large, we've had a really good, I think, team effort here to make sure Florida remains fiscally responsible. So what does 117, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple things. One, Florida has probably close to 23.5 million people now. That budget number that we're currently under, that I'm proposing for next year, that's less than the budget of New York City, which is only 8 million people. New York State, which is 3 or 4 million people fewer than Florida, their budget's over twice the size of the state of Florida's budget. I can tell you the roads aren't better up there because I was just up there. And the taxes, of course, are a lot higher. So we're really showing, how it can be done. And there's a couple tweaks that we make here or there on different things, but our overall footprint from a government perspective is that we have the lowest number of state government workers per capita, and we either are the lowest or second lowest in state spending per capita of all 50 states. And so the outcomes, are superior to states that are spending 25, 50, 100% more per capita or even outright than we are in the Sunshine State. This budget, and so we're keeping within that, and we're going to be able to do, more debt retirement early, all this other stuff. But we're also doing some really, really big things. And so in the budget I'm proposing, we are setting aside a record $1.56 billion solely for teacher pay increases. And so we started this program a few years ago, actually probably 5 or 6 years ago now, because, people would say, pay teachers more. So the legislature, if they would do more education spending, it goes down to the districts. and then magically it gets spent on everything pretty much but that, right? So we said, all right, we're not just going to send money. So we're going to do a pot of money. That's the only thing you can use it for. And so we started, I think, with 500 million, half a billion, and now we're up to over $1.5 billion to be able to do that. And so that's been able to provide meaningful differences in teachers' professional lives. Now, there's still a few districts when we do this, they will withhold the teacher salaries and they use that as bargaining chips, these unions, for other things. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, you should be getting that out the door immediately. People want the help. They want to be able to do that. So we're going to continue doing this. I think it's been very successful. It's a way to make sure that money actually is going in the classroom. I mean, basically, it's the classroom, 90% of it is, what teacher do you have standing in front of the classroom? That's the most important thing. You can talk about bells and whistles and all this stuff, and I'm not saying none of that stuff matters at all, but ultimately it's that teacher that's there. By the way, we were probably the first state or one of the first states to not allow cell phones in class. And, part of it was it's not good for kids learning and all that, being on the phone and everything. But, part of it was we actually did that as part of a teacher bill of rights. It's like, you're in front of there. Why do this if everyone just buried texting all the time? So we didn't think it was fair for them. And then also just having discipline in the classroom. So we were doing that. Now this was a few years ago. When we did it, I think someone on MSNBC said it was an example of rising fascism in America. And I'm just thinking to myself, man, now everyone's doing it, so they say it's good, right? But we were doing it, so it's got to be bad from their perspective. But you've seen positive results, I think, in performance, and that's something that's really, really significant. And, I made an announcement last week about a Bill of Rights against artificial intelligence. And this is going to be a huge issue. It could be way worse than cell phones or social media if we don't approach this in an intelligent and rational fashion. There's a whole host of implications for society. They want to put data centers where it's going to take up all this power and water, and obviously we're not going to allow them to take away from ratepayers and make them pay more. We're going to protect that. There's issues about what it does to the job market, which is the reason why you wouldn't want to subsidize this. And then there's also issues about your personal likeness and what they can do, and truth in advertising. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But how this is going to impact education is a huge issue. And it's going to be something, I know there's a lot of folks in the legislature that are working on it. But that being said, we put our money where our mouth is. We did record funding for teacher pay increases for Florida, and this proposal today is the biggest by far. And I can tell you, people that have followed this stuff, if we were here, 4 or 5 years ago, and someone said, yeah, they're going to end up doing $1.56 billion for teacher salaries, people would say that's not feasible, that's not possible, that will never happen. We've shown it's possible, and we've gotten it done. The overall education budget, K-12, is another record, $30.6 billion. I think when I became governor, it was probably like, somewhere in the low 20s. So you've seen. Now, I'm not one to say the money is going to necessarily equate to outcome, because you have some places that have massive spending and they have horrible results. And I think a lot of it is that money is going for special interests rather than to actually help. But so the money itself isn't necessarily going to be determinative, but you've seen the commitment has been very, very strong for our K-12 education system. We're doing $1.7 billion in funding for early child education, almost $2 billion for our state college system. We have this great college system where people are getting a lot of practical skills and are really making a difference in their communities, and that should be applauded. We're also doing $4 billion for the state university system. We're ranked by, I believe, U.S. News and World Report as the #1 public university system, in the United States. And there's been a lot of great things that have happened over really many years, where the bar has been raised academically. At least on the state university, not quite with football yet. I mean, we'll see what happens. I know University of Miami got in the playoff, which I was very supportive of, but it's not a state university. At least we have some Florida representation. Although, UCF, you guys, this USF coach is going to be really good. I think they're going to be tough. So we've had great strides, but I'll tell you, the most important factor is why we're ranked #1 public university system is affordability. We have not raised tuition for in-state since I've been governor, and so it's about $6,300 for an in-state Florida resident to be able to go to, and we have a number of universities that are ranked very, very highly amongst public and even amongst other universities. You know, they did a thing with the, I think it was the Manhattan Institute, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal. It was a ranking of universities, but they were focusing on also not just legacy prestige, which, you know, look, that's a factor, right? I mean, like if someone says Harvard, everyone immediately thinks, you know, that's a high academics, right? And Harvard was founded in the 1600s, Yale 1701. This is before we were even a country. So, I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of legacy that kind of gets built up there, and that's fine, but it's like, okay, what about all these other things? What about, you know, free speech? What about some of the things that really are important, focusing on strong academics, not the ideological stuff, all this stuff. So they did different criteria, and on that criteria, University of Florida actually ranked #1 because this is more about what's the experience. It's not just focusing on legacy prestige. So that's something that's really good. But the affordability to be able to go to a public university and not have to really take out a single cent in loan. Because, you know, if you work part-time jobs, you could do it. If you're good enough to get in a lot of these schools now, you probably qualify for the Bright Futures Scholarship, which is 100% or 75% tuition, depending on what you qualify for. So we're graduating students that don't have this ridiculous financial millstone around their necks. And I'll tell you, and it started in kind of I remember being in high school, and certainly in the years after, kids were told, high school students, you got to go to college. You don't get that degree, your prospects are not going to be strong. And yeah, you know, if you go $100,000 in debt and you end up with a engineering degree from MIT, you're probably going to be okay. I'm not going to sit there and tell you ain't going to be able to handle that. You probably will. But if you go to some fourth-tier private university, some of that's even more expensive than MIT, and then you graduate with a degree in zombie studies, well, guess what? The C's aren't going to part for you. And you're going to end up in a job maybe you could have had at a high school, but then you have this huge financial millstone around your neck. And so I think a lot of these students were sold the bill of goods over the years. I think a lot of these universities were able to profit because they basically could get the loans. It's the federal government's responsibility. Since 2010, I guess they took it over. And so why does a fourth-tier university care if you go 50 or 100 or 150 in debt? That's not going to be their problem. And so there's not been any accountability for that. Incidentally, you know, I think the university should be responsible for the loans ultimately. I mean, I think that if someone can't pay it, then that should be something, that was a failure of the university to be able to do it. They should have some risk in this, but be that as it may, that's a different subject. But the affordability is so important, and our state colleges are very affordable too. We are keeping that going. We're keeping the Bright Futures fully funded. You know, there have been people through the years that have wanted to take whacks at it. You know, I've always been a defender of it because you think about it. You have families that are just working like middle class. They don't get anything. Like literally, they get less than somebody that's on welfare, and they get less than a lot of the rich people who have access to policy and can get bailouts and everything. So literally, they just got to do it. They got to work hard. They got to do. They don't get anything. The one thing that they can get for their kids is Bright Futures Scholarship, which is, even though the tuition's not high comparatively, that's a huge plus. You have 2 or 3 kids, and you send them, and they get the Bright Futures. Major thing. So I'm a big believer in it. I think it's been good. You know, when you do scholarships, it's not really as bad. When you do a lot of loans, that ends up, you know, we control the tuition, but like in private, every time they increase loans, the tuition goes up. And so you're not really, the student and the family aren't any better off from having done the loans because the tuition keeps going. So we've had no increase in tuition. This is one of the most inflationary things in modern American history, college tuition, but not in the state of Florida. So that's a really, really good thing. Another thing that we've done is, yes, these are good financial commitments. We believe in the mission, but you got to have good structure and policy in place so that the outcomes are going to be good. And so we did things to make sure that we have productive faculty, that we're not having faculty positions and tenure being used to advance agendas. So we have post-tenure review. All the tenure now have to go review and can be terminated. So people have been weeded out now over the last few years. But on the flip side, we've now empowered college presidents. If you run a school like Hamilton School, University of Florida, which is amazing, they can go and recruit faculty directly. And we've given money, $100 million. We did a couple years ago, I think 2 years in a row. Legislature didn't fund it this year. We put that in the budget. Recruit and retain bonuses to be able to bring people to Florida at our state universities and then keep them there for the long haul. And I could tell you, we were doing this thing at the University of Florida with the Hamilton School, the groundbreaking. And, because they have this ability to recruit and pay without having to, go through the old system, you have all these people to help us produce have major support for infrastructure and transportation. So over $14 billion for our state work program. So that more than funds everything we need to do. And I did Moving Florida Forward, which said all the stuff we need. And Central Florida is the #1 place, right? Because, some of the stuff they've done around here has helped. But you get down near Disney and Champions Gate and Polk on I-4, all those other areas, and it's not just rush hour. It could happen at any time, right? So we're like, all right, we got to get this stuff going. So there were projects that weren't even going to start till next decade that are now started. They're going to be delivered 5 or 10 years ahead of schedule. But we said we're going to do this I-4, continue what's been done, and bring it into Polk. But we decided to do temporary expansion as the permitted is being done. So just opening up the temporary has cut the commutes in half. Like they literally will have the videos before and after, and you see it flow better. So we're doing that. We're doing all the stuff in all those different areas and in other parts of the state too. Tampa Bay, we've got the 395 interchange in Miami, we've got stuff in the Panhandle, I-75 near Ocala, like that's a big project. You guys, anytime you go, if you have to go north on 75 from here, you will potentially hit some bad traffic once you get near Ocala. So widening that, doing a bunch of stuff. So this is big, and this is on top of all the additional money that we brought to bear to be able to do so much over so many years. We are including major pay increases for state law enforcement. So for us, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, State Highway Patrol, our state troopers, as well as law enforcement associated with other agencies like Fish and Wildlife. And that's something that, one, is earned. It's something that they deserve, but it's also something we need to do to be able to recruit and retain. You don't want to be in a situation where they can make more money doing, other things that may not be as demanding, because then people are going to make those decisions. We're going to continue our law enforcement recruitment bonus program. So we instituted this when they were talking about defunding the police years ago. And honestly, these police officers are being treated horrible in places like Seattle and New York City and all this stuff. And so we said, listen, we want good people in Florida. We do have a need to have more, growing state, everything. So we're going to do a $5,000 bonus for new recruits. And that could mean you move from Chicago. Could also mean you come out of school and you want to go into law enforcement. You can get it even as a Floridian for that if it's your first law enforcement gig. So that's been really effective. We were just up in New York the other day meeting with some of the law enforcement community, and they're very worried about what's going to happen with Mindami becoming mayor, because he's hated the police, for most of his life, and wanted to disband the agency and all this other stuff, and says that prisons are, he said that prisons are somehow like a waste of resources. You should just be, putting people on the street, bringing social workers. I mean, I can just tell you, it's not even like Republican, Democrat. I'm just telling you, this is not going to work, okay? That will not work. And so they're in a situation where, how much support are they going to have? Would you want to wear the uniform and risk your life to apprehend a dangerous suspect, bring them in, and then the judge just puts them right back out, and you got to do it again a week later when the person commits more crimes? It's demoralizing. I mean, people don't want to do that. So I do think you're going to see a reaction to that. And I'm not saying they're all going to come to Florida, but I do think you're going to see some. So there'll be some opportunities to be able to recruit some good people. We're going to continue. You'll hear from Mark about the Florida State Guard, which has been a huge asset. He'll talk about some of the things that we did. That was started by the legislature. Not started because we've always had it. It just kind of got mothballed, I think, after World War II. But they did it when Biden became president, because, we were fighting, for example, we wouldn't do the vax mandates for National Guard. And we said, we're not doing it. And we didn't do it. But if push really came to shove, ultimately your National Guard can be conscripted by the federal government. And that was what we were concerned about. So we said, why don't we have something to control our own destiny, has no federal tentacles, it's purely the state of Florida. And they've done things like hurricane response, they've done all this stuff, and it's been great, and I think people really feel a sense of pride, that they're involved in that. So we're able to do that. Now, obviously, our relationship is much more positive with the federal government now than it was during those Biden years, but I still think it's like this is important to have for the state going forward, not just now, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road. We also have additional major support for the National Guard. Major support for improving veterans' nursing homes, historic support for cancer research, our Cancer Collaborative Incubator program that my wife has really done a great job spearheading, as well as the Innovation Fund, which a lot of these institutions are now able to benefit from, and not just the handful that are well known. You have others that may be doing some more cutting-edge stuff. We're really, really supportive of that all the way around. And then finally, environment. We promise more on environmental restoration than anybody thought possible. We've exceeded that by a country mile in terms of what we've been able to do. And some of that is Everglades, which is the biggest restoration program in all the country, and maybe even for environment, maybe in the world, but certainly for the United States, the largest undertaking that's ever been done or that's currently being done. But we've also done stuff for the health of springs. We've done a lot of transition from septic systems to sewer systems. We've done conservation with the Florida Wildlife Corridor, massive acreage that's been now there and is going to be conserved, and is going to end up being some concrete jungle. And that's a huge part of the state now, and we're going to continue, adding for all that. We're also doing beach renourishment, supporting coastline, very important for tourism and all these other things. And I know that the Interior Department had floated doing the Gulf drilling, and we've not supported that since I've been governor. We don't. But it's not even just with the tourism and risk. Military uses that to train. All those pilots in the Panhandle, that's what they go. So that's important too. But protecting the coastline. is something that's really, really significant. And, you know, people, you go to different parts of the country, and there's some nice spots, but I'll tell you, if you like beach, you know, we are number one, you know, across the board. I mean, there's just no question. And not every part of Florida is as good as every other part, and I will keep my mouth shut about what I know is best. But it's just, but, you know, we hit the heights. It's really important, and it's been great for our economy, but also just doing things like Everglades restoration. You now have stronger aquifer in South Florida. You have more water going to Florida Bay, better fishing, better salinity levels, all better, even flora and fauna, the eco-tourists that want to go there and take pictures. You see a resurgence in some of this stuff. There are going to be more. We're going to get continue. We've stepped up the python removal in the Everglades. You know, we stepped it up when I was and we kept doing better, but like we needed a moon, so we got some private sector incentives. So there's a lot of great stuff that's happening there. So all being said, I think what the budget does is it builds off the success that we've had. This budget's entitled Floridians First because that's the focus of it. It's putting our people first and making sure we're good stewards, but also making sure that folks, that the needs that we have are being addressed. One final side item that I will mention. So we have no income tax, and we won't. We have sales tax, but almost all the essentials now are exempt. You know, your groceries, medication, we did the exemption for all baby items. So diapers, wipes, strollers, all that is exempt. Back to school holiday is now permanent in law. Disaster supplies is now permanent in law. We're currently in the middle of what I call the Second Amendment sales tax holiday. No tax on accoutrements, ammunition, firearms. I think fishing, camping, you know, all this stuff is tax-free till the end of the year, you know, which is great. But when people talk taxes, yeah, they like getting the brakes on those things. But when they talk taxes, what they're talking to us about is property taxes. And so, you know, the state doesn't control property taxes. It's a local issue. I think most people have followed me know that I'm talking about having something on the ballot in November of 2026. We're working on some good stuff, but you know, we're doing this very deliberately. We're making sure it's something that can get broad support. You know, it's not a Republican-Democrat thing. It's just about a taxpayer thing. You know, we want you to own your own home, our homesteaded Floridians. We don't want to be in a situation where you've been paying taxes for 20 years, and if you stop paying, then they can just take your home. We also want to make it affordable for young people, young families, because property values have gone up. Even if they can afford the home, they're paying way more taxes than the same home would have cost if they had purchased it 10 years earlier and then had homestead to limit the valuation increases. So this is a huge issue, and we'll have some more to say about it, you know, going forward. But because of the way Florida's tax structure is, this is a local function, and if you want to see relief in a real major way, it's got to go on the ballot in 2026, and then Florida voters have to approve it as an amendment to the Constitution. I've been very clear that, you know, we've got non-Floridians who own property, foreign, I mean, there's rich people from Brazil and all these people. They own, you know, a mansion in like Miami or whatever. You have people that own Airbnbs. Obviously, we have commercial landowners, and they all do property tax. Our focus is on, you know, residential homesteaded Floridians, your primary residents, and whether you know, can you own that free and clear, and the exemptions that you would get. So, you know, sometimes people say, oh, there's not going to be any revenue. No, all that other stuff will still be there. Interesting fact, in 2019, so this is the first year I was governor, local governments in Florida brought in $32 billion in property tax revenue. Today, they're bringing in $56 billion in property tax revenue. Now, yes, the state has grown. Yes, we've had inflation. And I'm not saying that, you know, even like if you do inflation, population inflation adjusted, the nominal number will be higher. There's no question because of the underlying changes in Florida and the overall economy with the inflation. But that's almost doubling the revenue in 6 years that we're seeing. So the majority of the revenue is not homestead residential. It's non-resident, non-homestead residential, commercial, and investment. So you're talking about a fraction of this. So we have an opportunity to do something big. Now, you know, some places have more wherewithal. Now, I think we've been showing, or Blaise and Gully has been showing, you know, overspending, and we want to make sure that the taxpayers are getting breaks rather than have more spending. But put that aside. There's some communities, some counties that are fiscally constrained. We have 32 of them, and they're more rural, and they don't have the economic engine that an Orlando has, or that a South Florida has, or a Tampa, or a Jacksonville. And so I've put in the budget, and I'm not saying it's even going to be necessary, but I put in the budget enough money to completely 100% reimburse any homestead property tax reduction for those fiscally constrained counties. And so I don't want to, you know, don't tell, like, you know, go tell your senator you're not going to have. No, you will have it. Now, there's some people that say you shouldn't do that. But my view is it's a little more difficult maybe for some of them, and now eventually they're going to have to figure out. But if you look at the growth of the revenue that's come in, if you didn't have homestead, and just how the revenue from the non-homestead has grown, honestly, you'd be pretty close to where we are now, not too distant future, the way it is. Because, you know, people come and, you know, they'll buy a second home, they'll do this, and this tends to be at the higher end, so they're assessed higher, and they're paying more tax. But we have an opportunity to give people relief on this, so we're going to be working. You know, I know there's been a lot of great work that is being discussed. You know, I've been talking with some of the senators, but I know some House members are working on a lot of stuff. We got to be bold, we got to be strong, and we got to do something that's going to have a meaningful difference in people's lives and the lives of families. And, you know, otherwise, you know, it just ain't gonna fly. So thanks everybody that's been a part of this. We've done a lot of great stuff. This shows, you know, there's a lot of places where, you know, the budget's like the worst thing to deal with because the outlook is so gloomy. The facts are so bad. You know, some of these states are running massive shortfalls, this, that. You know, you have a state now that has a maxed out rainy day fund, has major reserves. I mean, I think every year I've been governor has been record reserves. Like, we had more at the height of COVID because I did Moving Florida Forward, tax cuts, all this other stuff. But pretty much every year I've been governor, I don't think there's any other year where there have been more reserves that we've had in our budget. And yet, I think if you go back to my first year and you do inflation and population adjusted, so the top line's higher, but I don't think you're going to see it that has been that much different over this period. I think it's been pretty stable. I think it's reflected population growth, and obviously you've had to adapt to a more inflationary environment. I mean, I have some projects I had to fund twice because of how much they went up because the inflation, you know, pay $80 million one year, then you got to kick in another 40 or something, you know, the next year. And it's like, I hate doing that. I have heartburn doing that. I want to veto that when I see that on my desk. Trust me, it just bugs me. But the reality is, you know, that's a function of what was going on with the economy. So we're in great shape. We got to keep the momentum going. And I want to thank everybody that's been involved. So we're going to hear from some of the stakeholders. So we'll start with education and Stasi.